Welcome back to the Religious Treehouse. I'm Jodie.
And I'm Matthew.
How are you doing today, Matthew?
I am doing good. I went to a baseball game yesterday, and that's always great. We won, so doubly good.
Even
How are
better.
you doing?
You know what? My emotions very much have a release the Kraken feel right now.
Oh,
And I think that really fits with today's episode about the Leviathan.
yeah. No, you're really embracing the monster. It's
Yeah.
great. No, no, I'm excited to talk about the Leviathan, the big baddest biblical monster. This should be a lot of fun. I think way back when we started this, I like wrote down a lot of ideas of like podcasts that we could do, and I thought, oh, this would be a great Halloween episode. But here we are in April or May or whenever we are, which close enough, close enough to Halloween, right? Happy Halloween to whoever's listening to this in October, uh, in the distant future. Happy Halloween.
Beltane just happened. I'm just trying to think of a holiday
Yeah,
that this
no,
could correspond with. But yeah, happy Halloween. Sea monsters. Didn't know we'd be getting into that on this podcast.
yeah, but before we get into sea monsters, I think maybe a brief conversation on monsters in the Bible could be a little fun to introduce us to this topic.
I'm sorry. Did you say monsters is in plural?
There's monsters. Okay, so maybe that's a good question. What is a monster?
Yeah.
And then we can talk about what, because there's so many monsters in the Bible. Do you not?
Okay. No, I did not know that.
Okay, so I think when I say monster, what do you think of?
Um, I think of scary, big, pointy teeth, wants to eat you and kill you and take you away from your friends and families. Like when I think of like a fantasy monster, when I think of like
Hmm.
a normal monster, I just think of a man in the woods.
Yeah, sure. I think those are definitely aspects, monstrous aspects for sure. I think in monster theory, there's a lot of ways to try to categorize monsters. And there's so many different types of monsters. There's your zombies, there's your werewolves, there's your um, flocks of unnatural birds. Like there's so many different ways for monsters to be monstrous. So like like some common traits are going to be bodily anomalies like fangs, like that you see in vampires, or um, physical aberrations, but like are just weird that like you don't normally expect, like blobs. Like blobs are a monster. Oh, and sometimes it's things that look completely normal but are out of place, like a little girl in the middle of the woods.
Mm.
Nothing unnatural about a little girl, but if you see her holding a balloon in the middle of the woods, that's a monster for sure.
I am running away. I guess monster is then the intent of whatever that
Maybe,
creature is, or
well, maybe because there's also good monsters. Because Casper the Friendly Ghost, is a monster, but
no.
just because he's a ghost, just because he's a monster, doesn't inherently make it bad.
He's a friendly spirit. I don't understand how Casper could be a monster.
Yeah, I think monsters often thought of as being bad, and for the most part, monsters are bad, but they can and often and sometimes are good, and sometimes they go back and forth between that boundary. Are they good or are they bad? And we'll see that with the Leviathan when we talk about that. But you get naturalistic ones. You get Bigfoot. You get the Yeti. You get some supernatural one like ghosts or succubi. And then there's some like unnatural ones like the basilisk, the giant snake, that are just way beyond anything that could be natural. But some common tropes that we get are giant size or supernatural or superhuman power. Hybridity, that's a real common one. That mix two species or two different types of beings. So it's like zombie mixing between living and dead.
Mm.
I see hybridity being very common in monsters,
Yeah, have you
or
ever
even,
watched the zombie movies on Disney Channel?
I don't think I've ever watched a zombie movie, like ever.
Okay, I would definitely start with the Disney Channel ones. They're very easy to digest.
Sure.
Whereas, like, if you get into like World Z and things like that, like, or, But zombies have also evolved. They used to be the, oh, I eat your brains. And
Yeah.
now they're called things like clickers and they can run and scale walls.
What's a clicker?
It's from the first was a game called The Last of Us. And actually, they're not zombies, it's a fungal virus that infected
Sure.
people. And that's all I know, except for Pedro Pascal.
Yeah. No, Pedro Pascal, another monster, a friendly monster though. No.
Okay, I can accept that. I mean, come on, his looks are kind of out of this world. Like, no one should look like that. Like, he looked like he could lure you to your death. Would the Pied Piper be considered a monster?
I don't think so. I think that well, it could be like the supernatural ability to, he's the one that gets the mouse, the mouses. What's the plural of mouse?
Mice?
Mice. Oh my goodness, that's like real dumb me right
Ooh,
now.
we should
He's the
have
one
an
that like,
episode on pluralities.
oh, he's the one that like gets mice to follow him with his flute, right? Or pipe.
Yeah, no, I believe that is correct. I believe in the original fairy tale it was that, but if you watch the TV show Once Upon a Time, he leads the children out of their beds and then they become the lost boys in Peter Pan. I watch too much Disney, can you tell?
Sure, sure. Oh, but yeah, amorphous beings, a blob or like a horde, where like one bird doing its own thing like could be normal, but if you got like 20,000 birds flying around in some sort of unison, it becomes a monstrous horde.
Yeah, my mom hates grackles.
Grackles,
Yeah, those are like they're hordes of birds, like
sure.
blackbirds in Texas that fly around and they make this very unpleasant sound with their mouth. I guess you could call it their calls or whatever, but it truly
Yeah.
just sounds like something coming to get you. And have you seen the horror movie Birds?
Uh, I don't think I've seen it, but like I know it. Like that's
Oh, you need to
like
watch the movie.
that's Hitchcock, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
terrible.
classic.
Awful. So scary. Okay, but monsters, biblical monsters.
Yeah, yeah. So even things like cherubim, cherubim?
I hear the word cherub, which makes me think
Cherub.
of Cupid.
Yeah.
So,
speaking okay, speaking of pluralities, in Hebrew, if for a masculine word that ends with im, that means it's plural. And a feminine word, if it ends with ot, that's going to be plural. Um, so a cherub is one, and you have cherubim, that's cherubs. Um, and then you have a sukkah, that's a booth, but you have sukkot, it's booths. Uh, that's a random tangent, but we have cherubim, which we often think of as little babies with like little wings. They're cute. That's not at all how they're described in the Bible. In the Bible, there's these winged, fierce guardians that like fight and like kill people, but they're not cute little babies.
question, because I know they're so cherubim, the seraphim. Are there any monsters that have a feminine plural? Also, is the
Oh,
masculine plural but just masculine alone, or is it masculine and feminine? Like the way, like sometimes, like in Spanish, like
yeah,
the way you'll do words, it's like it's either a they or a he, but then there's a very specific one for she.
yeah. No, it's in Hebrew. It's masculine and mixed as one.
Okay,
Uh, are there any
feminine
feminine
specific.
words? I don't know. I don't have feminine words. I don't have all the
No feminine monsters.
feminine words
There's no plural
organized in
feminine
my brain.
monsters. You've heard it here first.
I'm not. I'm.
Only men.
No, no, no. Because grammar isn't saying that these are masculine creatures. The being called a cherub doesn't mean it's necessarily a male. It's just grammar.
It's just it's there's no female specific ones, but I can think of like quite a few female like specific monsters, like
Right.
sirens
Right. Yeah.
or succubuses.
Yeah.
So that's
Succubi.
just interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I just there could be some with grammatically feminine monsters, but
You just don't know. So I've caught you off your game,
my bad.
and
Apologize.
that's what I'm here to do.
But the seraphim as well. Like when you think of seraphim, those are also kind of thought of as like snake-like angel type things, but in the Bible they're these fiery winged creatures with human hands, and they're not the angels that we often see them depicted as. So there's so many of these monsters in the Bible that I haven't mentioned that are tamed down in modern conversations about them. That and even the Leviathan, like we see the Leviathan as this big bad thing, but how it's described biblically is different than how we think of it oftentimes. And then there's even demons that are lost in translation. So oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, if you see the word pestilence, I think of in Habakkuk 3, that just comes to mind first. Uh, in the Hebrew, it's clear that it could be referring to pestilence, the word, but it could also be pestilence, the deity. So there's so many monsters in the Bible that just we look over and we kind of forget about.
I noticed you said only one Leviathan. Is he is there only one? Is he lonely? Is he the most lonely monster in the Bible?
Um,
No girlfriend?
I don't, I don't think we see multiple Leviathans. I think we only hear of one.
And he just lives in that big ocean by himself.
Yeah, yeah. But he's big guy. Leviathan's big,
I know,
big
but even
Leviathan.
Leviathans get lonely.
Well, we'll talk about who his friends are. That'll come up. We'll talk about who his best friend is at the end. But oh, but it begs the question when a lot of people think of the Bible, especially Christians, they think of the Bible as this place for comfort and hope and all those things. So why would we include monsters and all these grim, horrible creatures in here? Because there's so much death and destruction in the Bible, Hebrew Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. Like it's there. There's monstrous things happening by monsters throughout the entire Bible, and I think the problem that a lot of people have with wrestling with that is they don't want to have that back and forth of saying, oh, there's bad and good happening within this text. But I think the acknowledgement of the grim and the troubled and the horrors of reality put beside the verses that talk about good things and hope and comfort and all those things, that's what's able to give those positive verses their positivity, because without the negativeness of it, the verses mean much less. But we still, so many people, so many religious people try to negate these monstrous creatures. uh, there's a reason that we think of cherubim as winged little cute little babies, because we don't want to wrestle with the monstrous characters of the Bible that are so commonly killing and destroying people.
Well, also, I think people have a hard time looking at it because then it's like, oh, this text that we live our life by in the modern day, it
Mm-hmm.
references this monstrous thing that did never existed, so then it's fallible, right? Like,
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
because it airs more towards mythology than
sure.
it does a historical text, which I've noticed some people don't enjoy.
Yeah, no, definitely talk of monsters feels very much more mythologically speaking, and that is another thing that will upset people. Because I think the inclusion of monsters isn't to just have monsters there for the sake of monsters. I think they do serve a mythological purpose. They do serve a deeper literary purpose to reveal the anxieties of a culture. Like the reason these monsters are created are to kind of show what is giving anxiety and stress to these people, and it also kind of shows a mirror of what they don't want to be, of the opposite of the bad that they want to stay away from. And then sometimes that mirror can show a little bit of what they are, and they put a little bit of themselves in the monster, like this is the bad thing. So by understanding monsters through that lens, I think we can gain a lot by the cultures that created these texts.
I'm just thinking of Godzilla now. I don't know why. Because I think of Godzilla coming out of the ocean, and I'm thinking of the Leviathan coming out of the ocean. I mentioned this to you. And I was like kind of insistent. I was like, were they fisher people? Because why is it the monster they created was coming out of the ocean? Like, I get it. They live
Mhm.
near the ocean was vast. But when I think of like how societies created their different deities and things like that, it usually had to do with whatever they were coming into contact with the most. Like if they really relied on like fishing to sustain themselves, they would have a god or goddess of fishing. Or if they were very farm heavy, things like that. So I find it very interesting that they focused on the Leviathan coming from the water. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I don't know if they're focusing on Leviathan coming from the water as much as it's just another creature that exists. Like I don't think I think a lot of cultures have some sense of a ghost, and we see even references of ghosts, maybe not in the way that we would necessarily understand the category of ghost. We even see that in Old Testament and New Testament, but I don't think I can't think of anything necessarily that they interact with that creates a ghost.
It could be because, God in the sky, something below you. That could be where it was coming from.
What do you mean?
Well, like God came down or like God spoke down. I feel like when I see God in the Old Testament or when I hear from God, like I don't know, no, that was a bush. The bush is on the ground. I guess I'm just trying to understand why like the Leviathan is a sea monster. Like why out of
Mm,
everything it's a sea monster. And I get that it's because they lived next to the Mediterranean.
yeah.
I do understand that. I'm just wondering what the deeper thought culturally was of it being a sea monster. But then we'll touch on this later that it also kind of mirrors the Canaanite
Yeah.
um equal of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and right. It's not that the Leviathan is the only monster. It's that this is the one that we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
I worry that I've hyped up the Leviathan as the monster,
you kind of
um,
did.
more so than it just being like, hey, let's talk about this one, because it's a fun introduction to monsters.
Well, no, you kind of did, but also the book we read. Would you like to plug it in right now before I continue
Oh
talking?
yeah, yeah. No, I had you read chapter 7 of Esther Hamori's God's Monsters, which is a fantastic book uh, that I highly recommend. It's a very easy read, very interesting. Uh, but I mean, even to this point, it's chapter 7 of this book. It's not like the main monster per se.
What's the
In
main
some
monster then?
aspects, it is the main monster. Um, in other aspects, it's just another example because so many monsters in the Bible are under God's employ. The cherubim, um, the Sephirim, they work for God. Even the Satan figure, Hasatan, is often depicted as working for God and on God's side. And that is going to be an episode for a later time when we talk about that. But the idea of there being a monster that's not under God's employ, uh, like the Leviathan is not, taking any orders from God per se, is kind of how it differs from a lot of the other
Yeah.
monsters. And then the idea of God as a monster being supernatural, being superhuman, existing on multiple planes and interacting through different uh, hybrid locations. Like we can also depict God as a monster. That's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, but I would argue that perhaps God can be seen as the main monster of the Bible to some
Ooh,
extent.
I like that. Clip that. Um, okay, so then I just built up the Leviathan in my head. So it's just a monster, Jodie, just a simple little sea creature.
Yeah.
It's like Nessie, the Loch Ness monster, but this
Yeah.
is just the Hebrew Bible version of the Loch Ness monster.
Could be. I don't know enough about the Loch Ness monster to definitively say that.
I
Um,
know.
outside of it being a sea creature, that's about all I know. Oh, but yeah, we speaking lastly, my last thoughts on monsters generally in the Bible is it's fairly easy to try to categorize them within one or two of three categories. Either monsters as chaos, which I think Leviathan mainly fits under here, monsters of trauma, which Leviathan kind of fits under here as it's categorized against some other nations, and then monsters is a marker of identity. If you have these monsters as part of your identity group. So the Leviathan, I think we can get into
Yeah,
specifically now.
let's get into it.
Perfect. It's been a while since I've done my, but before, and then we can actually get into what I told you we'd be talking about today. But the Leviathan is kind of seen as God's worst enemy. Um, and I know that kind of goes against what we've been talking about, but this is the enemy of God, not the most monstrous of monsters per se, but the enemy of God in multiple verses.
Then this isn't what that's not what I get. If this is specifically the enemy of God, then wouldn't that make it the most monstrous of monsters?
I think it might make it the most powerful of monsters, but
Because wouldn't that make him the opposite of whatever position God is supposed to fill? The Leviathan should be filling the other side of that coin, the yin to the yang, if you will.
yeah, I don't think the Hebrew Bible is necessarily influenced by East Asian culture,
No one
but
is saying it is. That is just me using speak, relax, chill, the
sorry.
yin to yang.
um,
But why I'm using that is to get across what I'm trying to say.
mhm.
Like, one is one thing, the other is the other, and they like fulfill roles and they battle each other for a reason. Like, I don't think someone would write that to just write it like, hey, cool, here's a sea monster. Like, obviously the Leviathan has a role to fulfill.
Yeah, no, the Leviathan is definitely doing a thing, and the reason that it's in the story, there are reasons for it, but I don't think it's necessarily the opposite of God. I don't
But why
think
wouldn't
that's
it be?
necessary. What do you mean? Why wouldn't it be?
What why not? Why not?
Oh,
Have we explored it from that angle? Has the Bible been read enough to be explored from that angle?
yeah, I think I mean, and you can make an argument. That's what scholarship is figuring this out and reading these claims and saying, oh, there's connections here, and perhaps Leviathan can be seen as the opposite of God. I haven't seen anything to signify that. I see it more so as being a an enemy, but you know, I don't think when America fought Germany in World War II, just because that was the biggest enemy at the time, they were opposites per se.
I would, because one had freedom and the other didn't.
Yeah, no, that's an argument.
Sorry, I know I'm being a bit of a pill right now, but I'm really just trying to understand because the chapter reading it like it was saying the Leviathan was kind of like a blueprint for the devil. And growing up in the church, you're taught that like God and the devil are opposites, like there's heaven and hell, the good and the bad. And so now trying to look at it and see it with God and the Leviathan, I'm like, okay, there's a good and the bad. Like they both can cause destruction,
Sure,
but God does it with a reason and a purpose to further the people who follow him. But
that's a bold claim. That's a
that's what
definite,
I've gotten.
yeah,
I'm not claiming anything.
yeah,
Like they could. Like I think there are people who could make that claim. I'm not making that claim. I'm just, I don't listen to me. Who am I? I'm just a human. I'm just going based off the vibes of what we've been talking about here.
yeah. No, I think that there's definitely a difference between biblical studies and how Leviathan is used in the realm of biblical studies, and there's a difference between how Leviathan is used in theology and how churches, you know, create ideas about Leviathan. I can't speak well to theology and how modern churches consider Leviathan. But what I am qualified to talk on is how the biblical authors constructed Leviathan. So I don't know. I don't know if modern churches are saying these things that
Oh,
Leviathan is Satan,
I
but
don't care about the modern. I'm trying to understand the people back then.
right, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like if the people reading this back then, thousand like however many years ago, 1,000
Mm.
plus, when they were originally writing this stuff down, and they had God, and they were like, he needs a baddie best friend. Let's make up the Leviathan. Like you would think they'd be equals in some kind of way. Like if you're gonna be best friends with someone, they're kind of your equal.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here.
Sorry,
Before we get into all of that, maybe we just kind of walk through a little bit of how Leviathan is depicted.
I'll stop asking questions.
No. So first off, we see Psalm 74. I think we can bring that up, where we see this dramatic defeat of the sea monster, and they're lamenting over the destruction of Jerusalem and talking about if God is powerful enough to create the world and defeat such a mighty monster, why not end the exile? And the monster is this menacing memory. And it's meant to reassure people looking at their destroyed temple. So we have this enemy, this creature that's so big and terrible that is the mere mention of it should invoke fear of some sort. But then by adding God destroying it fairly easily, I think in Psalm 74, it depicts God defeating Leviathan fairly easily. That's supposed to offer a little bit of hope, saying like, "Hey, our God can do all these things. He created the world and defeated this big bad sea monster. Surely something good is going to happen." But also, it begs the question: if God did all those things, why did Babylon exile us? Why did Babylon defeat us? And so that's another function of monsters. They provide insights and ways to think about your current situation that otherwise wouldn't happen. So that's yet another use of Leviathan. Say, okay, let's think about the situation, and maybe not provide answers per se, but provide something to ponder over.
I don't know. It just feels like they whipped out a ruler for a measuring contest.
They did what?
Whipped out a ruler for a measuring contest because they created this big bad. And I'm going to get ahead of myself again. You know
Mm-hmm.
what? Never mind. I'm going to just let you talk about the Canaanite. Talk about ball. I'll talk
Okay,
about it when we get there.
sure. We can skip ahead a little bit, but so one way that Leviathan has been constructed and thought of, and we see this in Psalm 104 a little bit, is we see that in Genesis 1, where humanity is the pinnacle of creation, it's the ultimate thing that's created. In Psalm 104, we kind of see a reversal of that, where God creates all these things, and then the pinnacle of creation is Leviathan, not humans. And and that kind of tracks based on other sections of Leviathan being mentioned, where the Leviathan is this big, mighty creature with multiple heads and breathes fire and has tons and tons of scales and is big enough to walk out of the ocean. And the ocean is deep. So it's this big, giant thing. And in this verse, we kind of see Leviathan as God's companion, God's pet to some extent. And as opposed to the humans being made in God's image, we get the Leviathan perhaps made in God's image. And this perhaps paralleled some Ugaritic literature that implies the Canaanite deity El, who created Lotan, which we can see the linguistic similarities between Lotan and Leviathan, as a beloved plaything. So there are some similarities between neighboring cultures for sure.
Ours is better than yours.
Yeah, and we
It's
talked
what
about
that says to me.
We talked about that in our Genesis 1 episode,
But
where
you got to keep bringing it up, man.
yeah, no, there's this conversation between these national identities, and one way that you create that identity, especially in times of exile and without a nationhood, where you create these national stories to kind of say, okay, no, we're better than you. Look at our God. Our God is, so much better. So like there is an extent to that with Leviathan as well in Psalm 104.
And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying we need to keep saying it and repeating that that's what was going on because they're like it was building off of something else. It was getting its influence from other places. And like, I don't feel like a lot of people know that about the Bible. Like,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The Bible didn't just fall out of the sky. Like the Bible, as all literature is created by people in their own circumstances, of their own locations, their own societies. What's the Kamala Harris quote about the coconut?
you live in the context of everything that came before you. You didn't fall out of a coconut tree.
Yeah,
May have said those lines reversed from each other, but it's so true.
right. No, you get the point that things come from a context. And to think of the Bible just falling out of the sky willy nilly is it does a disservice to the text for sure.
Because just think of it like that and to not take in, and I guess maybe that's where I was coming from earlier. I don't know where I was coming from earlier. We know my anxiety is through the roof. But like so if I kind of wonder what the Canaanite version, if Baal and Lotam had a relationship where one was serving one purpose to be this good and the other was serving a purpose to be this bad, and how that influenced the creation of God and the Leviathan. Um, but also, yeah, it was built up in my brain that the Leviathan was this big bad, especially because the book was talking about how the Leviathan was the blueprint for the devil. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Theology is that God
Well,
and the devil are opposites.
yeah. I don't think this is as dualistic as we may want it to be.
Boo. You know me, I love a duality. I
Yeah.
love a I love two sides of a coin. So I will move away from that.
Right. But so I mean we already talked about in Psalm 74 of how it offers a dramatic defeat of the monster, but we get that again in another way with different details in Isaiah 51, which refers to if you look at Isaiah 51, it's not going to say Leviathan, it's going to say Rahab, not to be confused with the Rahab in Joshua. Different spellings, but same spellings in English. The
So did they drop the name of the Leviathan? Is that the Leviathan's name? Is that what we're supposed to surmise from that?
I think it's just a different way to refer to it. It may not be the exact Leviathan, verbiage, but it's this giant sea creature, which
Okay.
serves the same purposes in Isaiah 51 as Leviathan does, but by that name in other verses. So, but here we see God defeating Leviathan again, slicing it up into a million different pieces, and we see this again and again in the Bible that the Leviathan is repeatedly killed. And I think this goes back to mythology to an extent that the best monsters never stay dead. They always come back. There's always this recurring enemy that comes back. And they're defeated anciently, as we mentioned in our Genesis 1 episode, but it's always promising to resurface in some way or form. The Leviathan's always going to come back. There's always this looming danger that's ever present. And I think there's much to critique about the Percy Jackson series, but I think the Percy Jackson series shows this very well of the looming everness of monsters. So whenever I think of like monsters always coming back, I always think of Percy Jackson and how well that aspect is handled.
Always come back. They never stay dead. Hollywood has learned very quickly how to capitalize off that. They're like, don't let a good monster or villain stay dead.
Yeah. So in that sense, the monster is always defeated. The monster has always been defeated, but also its defeat is always to come. And we see that again in Isaiah 27 this time. And I should note here, I don't have we talked about Isaiah yet, really?
No.
Okay, so Isaiah 51, where I referred to it minutes ago, is part of uh, Deutero Isaiah, or by 51 we might be to
Did you
Trito
say
Isaiah.
Deutero Isaiah?
I did say Deutero Isaiah.
I hate when you add the Deutero to the beginning. It throws me off. You know this.
Second Isaiah, if you
Oh
will,
my God.
if you want me to speak
No, no,
boringly.
no.
But
I
after about Isaiah 40, it's generally understood that that's a much later addition. So Isaiah 27 and Isaiah 51 are
mhm.
coming from different times.
Isaiah's. Oh.
Yeah, well, yeah, different Isaiahs.
Oh,
But Isaiah 27, well, they're probably from like the school of Isaiah, and they were like wrote in Isaiah's name. We can talk about this in an Isaiah episode at some point. But Isaiah 27, we get this future idea. Like it says, on that day, the Lord with his cruel and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. So it's a future battle that's going to happen.
with his cool and gray and did you say broadsword?
I said cruel, cruel,
Cruel.
not cool,
Cruel.
cruel, and
Cruel.
great and strong sword.
Strong. Whipping out the ruler.
Yeah.
With super cool and great and strong sword, he slayed the Leviathan. Crazy. See, and
Yeah.
I would have paid so much more attention in Sunday school.
No, I
You showed
think
me a puppet show of that.
I think one thing that Christianity is missing out on is getting into the weirdness of the religion. Like I think there's some branches of Christianity that get so hold up and like, okay, the Bible must be literally true and must follow fit into all these, neat boxes and all those things that and it has to be defined and defended so perfectly that they just aren't comfortable with delving into the weird. I think the weird is so cool and the weird is so much fun.
No
And
magic, no monsters. All you have is rules.
and there's definitely some branches of Christianity that willingly dive into this and embrace the mystery of it. I think of particularly Orthodox Christianity. That's like, oh, it's all mystery. Just embrace the mystery, and I think that's a really beautiful way to do religion, like to embrace the mystery of it and say, I don't know. We kind of talked about that in our communion episode, but no, I think if Christians were like, no, this is a really weird text, and let's wrestle with it and try to figure out what in the world is going on, I think that could be really compelling for a lot of people. But that I digress. I digress. That's not the point of this.
There is so much money to make in the sword industry. They could start making Leviathan slaying swords. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Just
well,
saying.
I think the I think there's a lot of Christians that are already interested in the Lord of the Rings swords, so I'm sure they've already capitalized on that market. uh, but anyways, moving on, we also get Leviathan as kind of a metaphor for neighboring countries. So Ezekiel 29, we see, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon sprawling in the midst of its channels, saying, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. The idea of metaphorically conflating Leviathan with Egypt is very present. And that's another reason that we have monsters. Say, okay, this big, bad, evil monster that's done all these bad things to us, we can think of that as the other. Monsters are very good at othering. So creating the monster as Egypt is a way to kind of understand Egypt as this great big bad country.
Okay. So the Leviathan symbolizes
Yeah.
so many things, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah. No, and these are different authors using all these different tropes, using all these different uh, character parts there's this idea of a Leviathan, and it can be used in so many different ways by so many different authors in so many different times and so many different places.
So, maybe one of them did think that the Leviathan was the opposite of God and the other side of the coin. But some other ones thought it was different things. I'm just saying, I'm thinking there could be arguments for a lot of things for the Leviathan. Like
Yeah.
what it represents and symbolizes and the
Yeah.
hardships they had to go through. Like the Leviathan is just this overarching character for hardship.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the Leviathan can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The Bible is not monolithic. The Bible disagrees and is in conversation with itself and comes from a multitude of perspectives. The Bible isn't presenting one unified story of the Leviathan, but
What? Not one unified story.
I know, it's crazy. But now we can finally, because I've laid the groundwork of Isaiah, we can get to your questions of Satan and Leviathan, because we get this in Revelation 20, I think. Um, if I get my notes up, uh, 12 and 20. It's in Revelation 12 and 20. I wasn't wrong, but I also wasn't fully right. But in Revelation 12 and 20, we get this description of a giant red dragon with seven heads speaking, and it has this, I think there's fiery boiling imagery that's also going on with with this giant dragon. And in the Septuagint, the word dragon and Leviathan are kind of interchangeably translated. uh, and it kind of refers to the Satan at using this Leviathan imagery that it pulls from Isaiah 27. So by pulling the description of Isaiah 27 to conflate it with this Satan figure, this devil figure, however you want to take it, it slowly morphs into the devil to some extent. And it's not saying that they're one and the same. It's just reusing imagery for the Satan figure.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will. The Revelation was written like fairly later than some other things, right? Like,
Yeah, so this is New Testament. Revelation is New Testament.
yeah.
We're delving into Christian explicitly literature here.
No, I know, but do we know when Revelation was written? Because I've been getting conflicting things on TikTok.
Revelation, I believe, and see, and we're outside my area of expertise. I
Yeah.
can talk Old Testament stuff. I want to say Revelation is probably written around 100 CE,
Okay.
maybe a little earlier, maybe much later. If I remember, it's been a while since I've read about Revelation, but I think I heard Bart Ehrman talk about it a while back, and he mentioned 90 CE, give or take a bit. But yeah, it's going to be later. It's going to be later than the writings of Paul, later than most of the Gospels, if not all of them. But yeah, it's going to be later.
Okay. Okay. And I know this, don't put New Testament stuff onto Old Testament stuff. And don't put later Old Testament stuff onto older Old Testament, no, newer Old Testament stuff onto later Old Testament stuff. Right? Right? The writings.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's like the older stuff influences the later written stuff, but you can't take the later written stuff and put it onto the first stuff, you know?
right. It's generally, if you want to understand, the what the author was trying to get across, if you want to try to understand that, it's generally not great to try to look at forward in time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes looking forward in time can be really good at figuring out the earliest interpretations of the text.
Yeah.
So, what comes to mind immediately is um, of Sodom and Gomorrah, where
Mm-hmm.
Sodom and Gomorrah is this city in Genesis that's destroyed by God. These cities destroyed by God, and then some of our earlier uh, reflections on that text, our earliest interpretations of the text come from within the Bible, and we see that okay, from a few hundred years after this was written, it was understood that their greatest sin was inhospitality,
Yeah.
and that was how it was categorized. But yeah, so like understanding how texts interact with each other is important, but the biggest thing that happens that I see that happens erroneously is imposing New Testament things onto Old Testament, saying like, oh, this verse in Isaiah must have been talking about Jesus. Like, no, this verse in Isaiah was talking about its own thing. And then by reading the New Testament, we think that, oh, that must have been talking about Jesus, but we're imposing the New Testament onto the Old Testament, and that's
So
where it's
it would be incorrect, not that I've heard anyone say this, but it would be incorrect for someone to say, and speaking of the devil, refer back to Isaiah when God slaughtered the Leviathan, the earliest name for the devil. That would be incorrect.
that would be incorrect. Yeah.
That would be incorrect. I'm not saying I've heard it definitively, but now that I've said it, something in my soul feels like it's heard it before.
Oh no, I don't think understanding any Old Testament references of Leviathan is corresponds to any idea of a devil figure or a Satan figure, or an accuser, which is what Satan is translated as. But yeah, does that make sense about our conversation on the devil, whatever that may be? We'll have an
Yeah.
episode on Satan at some point, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Okay.
Um,
So we have God's favorite sea creature.
yeah, and then in Job we get a different kind of look at Leviathan, particularly in Job 41. And just for a brief recap of Job, what happens is the adversary or the Satan or Hasatan, however you want to say that, and God agreed to kind of experiment on Job, curious to see if he can be corrupted, and it's primarily instigated by God. Yeah.
You said Satan. Is Satan mentioned? Or is it just our adversary? I thought it was just adversary.
So the word we have there is Hasatan, which if we have a word starting with ha, usually that's the, and then
Okay.
the Satan. So it seems like the Satan is more of a title than a name. Like the adversary is kind of this character, and then it's evolved into Satan as we know him today.
Is that the other side of the God coin? Is that the duality?
Well, so the Satan figure is depicted uh, a lot of the time as working for God. Like in Job, like as we have here in Job, Satan isn't really, or Hasatan isn't really opposed to God in any way. Like they kind of had this bet going on and saying like, hey, what happens if we really mess with this guy Job? And it's not this battle between God and Hasatan. It's these just two divine beings of lesser authority kind of doing their own thing. And other times we'll get God sending out Hasatan to like do God's dirty work. So the idea of Satan has definitely evolved over throughout the Bible, and it's certainly evolved much more since the Bible was written.
Okay, we're definitely doing a Satan episode soon. But going back,
Yeah.
so the adversary and God are like they're messing with Job.
Yeah, they're messing with Job, seeing like, hey, much can we mess with this guy, and he's still going to stay righteous to some extent. And his children are killed. He's put into immense pain. God like sends word that this is all Job's fault, even though it's not Job's fault at all. And Job is angry and in grief. And eventually, like God kind of responds with like, "Be a man." And eventually, by the end, we get this big speech from God, where at some point he talks about Leviathan. And here again, we kind of get the imagery that Leviathan is the apex of creation. Leviathan is the big, the ultimate idea of creation, and we get this love poem. Kind of, it's not really a love poem per se, but it's like looking at Leviathan with immense respect, where we see this awe-filled description of Leviathan. This is Job 41:12. Let's just read a few lines. Um, where we have I will not keep silent concerning its limbs or its mighty strength or its splendid frame. Who can strip off its outer garment? Who can penetrate its double coat of mail? Who can open the doors of its face? There is terror all around its teeth. So it's this awe-inspiring poem of just being like, whoa, this Leviathan is like the dude. This Leviathan is this lovely, horrendous, huge, scary creature. And
He
it's
is
much,
that girl.
yeah, it's similar in structure to the wasps that we see in the Song of Songs, where like we're very much using this imagery of going body part by body part, explaining the Leviathan and all of its magnificence, I guess would be the best word. And there's this sense of intimacy, maybe not sexual, but like this closeness between God and Leviathan that we get in Job. So this kind of invokes weirdness because on the one hand, God, created a monster but kind of beyond God's control and let him loose, or God plays with the Leviathan and like is his buddy. And either way, it doesn't look great for God in this description of God and Job.
I mean, it depends on how you view things because I'm like, that's kind of baller. It's like his lapdog is this destructive, horrific sea
Yeah.
monster.
Yeah. So, no, it kind of emphasizes God's kind of ambiguous stance towards monsters. Like, like we see this throughout with all of the angels, the cherubim, and whatnot that God sends to do God's dirty work. God is generally kind of ambiguous towards the monstrous. So we see that here with Leviathan, where on the one hand, God repeatedly, again and again and again, defeats this monster and will always defeat this monster. But also, we have this imagery of God being buddy buddy with this great, horrendous sea monster with teeth all around its head. Like it's just this creepy, scary, multi-headed, sometimes multi-headed, sometimes breathing fire. Like it's just this great big creature that's very, very scary and sometimes gets killed by God.
I'm biting my tongue so I don't say the D word again. Because now
Yeah.
it's feeling like God itself is himself is the duality. He's both the good and the bad. He has both the lapdog and the monster to fight. He
Yeah.
sends people out to do his dirty work and sometimes does it himself and crazy. And the Leviathan, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I I think it strikes even more fear to think that this monster could come at you at the behest of God.
Well, yeah, the Leviathan isn't really seen doing God's bidding per se, but that's not to say that any of the other monsters in the Bible don't do God's bidding. So I don't think you have to be worried about the Leviathan coming after you because of what God has to say. You have many, many, many other uh, divine beings uh, that perhaps deserve more fear for being called on by God to attack you.
So then is the Leviathan unique for that? Like for maybe being more rogue than other monsters?
Not unique, but it's thus common. Like it's not that Leviathan is the only that isn't necessarily under God's payroll.
Yeah.
Um, but there's definitely a lot of monsters that we kind of sweep under the rug that are being paid by God.
The Leviathan seems to kind of like I don't necessarily know exactly what function it served, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's this big giant sea creature. It's there to be the epitome of fear. It sets, Egypt. Leviathan is Egypt in Ezekiel. The Leviathan serves this purpose of being the biggest and baddest and worstest.
Not the opposite. And it's not the Satan. I don't know. I'm less impressed after talking about it. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know what it is.
yeah. No,
I'm
it's
like,
it's there's a lot, and I think one of the beautiful things about the Bible is that it repeatedly brings up these characters. It's like a sitcom with a repeating character. Leviathan comes up again and again, but like we have different writers writing each episode. So and none of them are like really exactly sure what this character's function is, but they keep coming back into the episode, and we get to like figure out how this character fits in with all its pieces, and it's fun and exciting, and a lot of people die.
I don't know. I like some consistency in my characters.
Well, Bible may not be the book for you then.
But no, it's a cool, like, it's so cool to think of there being monsters in the Bible,
Yeah.
especially when, like, growing up, maybe in the church, you've been told to shy away from things like monsters and magic, and that those are things you shouldn't look at or be into because it's not biblical, but it is.
Yeah. No, there's a whole lot more in the Bible if you look a little closely. But yeah,
Anything else?
that's all I have on Leviathan.
I said the word duality too many times, so we may need to make a words Jodie can't say list. But thank you guys for joining us today, and follow us on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Facebook, Twitter, Bluesky, Instagram. Email us at the religious treehouse at gmail.com.
Yeah.
And yeah, like and comment, subscribe, do what you got to do. Let us know what you want an episode on. Give us suggestions. We do have a master list we're working off of, but I think we would take suggestions.
Yeah. And tell us your favorite biblical monster.
Yeah,
Or
mine would be Judas.
geez, that's just a human. That's just a dude.
And isn't that the scariest thing of all? Humans. We
You
tear
know.
down forests, we poison water, the scariest monster at all of all, and in God's own image.
Wow. Profound. All right. Bye
Bye,
all.
guys.